Hi everyone, welcome to our channel. I'm Heather Liu of Closet Core Patterns, and I'm coming to talk to you about our number 8 essential pressing tools. And when I say essential, I don't mean you absolutely have to have them, and if you don't have them, like you're a bad person. I don't mean any of that. These are just things that we use all the time in the studio. We have a little cart next to our pressing station, and we are constantly pulling for these things, and they do different things in different circumstances. And my thing about sewing is it's really like 80% pressing. You can kind of not sew something super well, but if you press it well, hide a lot of sins. And the more that you sew and the more types of garments you sew, the more helpful it is to have like different tools in your back pocket that you can pull out for different applications. So we're going to look at some of them. Some of them you've probably heard of before. Some of them are weird things that we've devised on our own. And one is very weird, and I'm going to leave it for the end, but I might say it's the most important one of all of them. And you have no idea what it is and you're not expecting it. Unless you saw the thumbnail for this video, in which case you know what it is, and I'm spoiling the surprise, but I'm going to leave that one for the end, make you wait for it. First up on our list, it's a tailor's ham. You've seen these before. This is such an iconic tool. It's got felt or wool on one side and cotton on the other, and this is supposed to be the side that you press wool on, and this is supposed to be the side that you press cotton on, but I kind of press whatever I want. And what's lovely about it is it has all of these different curved seams. So this is a great part for doing a sleeve cap on. If you have a really small little curved area, it's here. If you're doing a dart, it's nice to do it on this seam. It just really gives you a lot of different curved surfaces to press, because of course our bodies aren't flat two-dimensional shapes. The clothes that we're making for them aren't two-dimensional shapes, and you need a pressing tool that's going to help you get that 2D or that 3D into your garment. This thing. So they generally, you can find them for about 20 or 30 bucks. If you're cheap or you're broke or you just don't like buying stuff, you can also use a rolled up towel in a pinch. And also the funniest trick I saw for this was Amy, our very own Amy here at Closet Core, saved up all of her husband's wool socks, and whenever they got holes in them, she would just stuff them in the stock and stuff them and ended up coming up with like a pretty cool seam roll like thing that was really durable. And that's kind of like a good budget way to do it if you don't want to buy a new thing. There's also something called a seam roll. And so this is similar to the ham, but it's longer and it's kind of more of a tubular shape. And this is really helpful when you need to get inside a sleeve or a pant leg, or if you're making a wool coat and you don't want to have a flat area, you don't want to press your seam flat on a flat area because the outline of the seam might end up impressing onto the fabric. So you would do that on your seam roll, on maybe the more curved side of the seam roll. And that helps, basically just gives you the part that you really need to press, the center of that seam, and less the corresponding like seam edges that might impress. So we like a seam roll for that. So these are the ones you've probably seen before, and you're like, yeah, duh, Heather, like I know these are things that I need. I have them already. Why am I even watching this video? Sorry, I'm here, I'm just trying to help. The next one, and forgive me for this looking so disgusting, but this I would also say is one of your most valuable tools, and it is called a pressing cloth. And this particular one is made out of silk organza, and we've had it for years. And I feel like it's a really good indication of why you want to use a pressing cloth. It's covered in interfacing. It's like brown from water from the iron. It's all gummed up. And basically this protects the garment that you're pressing underneath this pressing cloth. You put it underneath, and then all of the gunk that might be on the iron goes on the pressing cloth. It protects the fabric beneath, so if it's a more delicate fabric, like, I don't know, and something that maybe tends to burn or scorch, it helps kind of provide a little bit of a layer between that and help mediate the heat a little bit. And what I love about silk organza is that you can see through it, so it's really easy to work with because you can see exactly what you're doing below. And if I'm ever making any kind of tailored project, or if I'm working with delicate fabrics, I'm always using a press cloth. And you can get silk organza, buy a yard of it and cut different pieces, and it'll last you like, I don't know, this, I've probably had this for 10 years based on how disgusting it is. So they last a long time, they're super helpful, and they do help protect your fabric from that heat of that iron. Depending on what iron you have, and the model of it, you may be able to get a Teflon shoe for your iron. I'm gonna have Jimmy, our videographer, put a photo of a Teflon shoe here because Nissan is currently using our iron, so I wasn't able to bring it in the room. But we have a steam generator iron, and when it arrived, it was just the foot of it was basically pure steel, and it worked great. But the Teflon, it's again almost similar to the pressing cloth. It's like an intermediate layer that helps mediate the heat. You don't have this super, super, super hot piece of steel on your fabric. It's really smooth, and it slides really easily over the fabric, so it doesn't it reduces scorching because you're not getting stuck on the fabric. And if you happen to get a little interfacing glue on the Teflon foot, you just take the Teflon foot off, you clean it, and then you're not having to deal with cleaning the iron. And I'm looking at our iron right now, and there is little pieces of interfacing glue stuck on the surface of it right now. And if we had that Teflon foot for this iron, it would be very simple to clean. So it's not a must-have, but certainly if you are sewing with a gravity feed iron or a steam generator iron, I definitely recommend getting a Teflon foot. And if you can find one that fits your domestic machine, even better. Now I'm going to show you some of my favorite things made out of wood. The first one is called a clapper, and they're not super cheap depending on where you get them. Again, you're looking at like 20, 30 bucks for this thing. And you're like, why am I spending money on a piece of wood for my sewing practice? I'm not a woodworker. What this does is when you have a hot seam and you've just pressed it and you've hit it with a bunch of steam, you put this clapper on top of that seam and it wicks the heat and moisture away and it absorbs it into the wood. So when you are sewing something like a pair of jeans or anything with wool, it's just really helpful at anchoring that seam in place, flattening the seam, cooling the seam. It's almost like the cool setting on your hair dryer. You're styling with heat, and then you'll hit that hair with a little bit of cool, and it helps set the curl. This is exactly the same concept as this wood clapper. Highly recommend, very easy to use, and you can just kind of always have it on your ironing board and pick it up and use it when you need it. Next favorite thing made out of wood, similar to the clapper, it's called a point presser. And this is one of these like medieval looking torture devices that you might see in a sewing store and like wonder what it is and why you need it. Do you absolutely need to have it in your stash? No. But it does serve two purposes. So this surface is a clapper, so you can use it in much the same way that you use this thing. But what you also get is all of these little surfaces. So if you've ever pressed a shirt collar, especially when that shirt collar has like a 1/4 inch seam allowance, you know how tricky it can be to like get into that little corner and get everything pressed just right. And so this is a really great tool for narrow seams, pointy areas, anywhere where you need to get in and you really need to be able to press the entire thing. Hence the name point presser. So this probably of everything that I'm going to show you would be, in terms of like priority, maybe the last on the list. But it is one of those things, or close to being the last on the list, but it is one of those things that you would be happy to have. And if you wanted the 2-in-1, you could just get this and skip this. But because it's a bit big and cumbersome, I do tend to prefer this like on a day-to-day basis. And then this is the thing I'm pulling out when I'm sewing collars and other finicky little bits. My third favorite thing made out of wood is this plunger handle that I got at the dollar store. And you might be asking yourself, why? And I'm here to tell you. This little thing cost me $1. And similar to the seam roll that we talked about earlier, this guy right here, you need to get into a pant leg, you need to get into a shirt, you need a curved area to press a seam. This gets into even tighter zones. So if you have a really long, narrow tube and you need to press a seam open, hi, here I am. But I like to use this for seams where I'm concerned about the seam getting pressed through to the layer below. Because the nice thing about this, because it's got such a narrow diameter, it means that if you want to press a seam open and you want to be absolutely sure that the thickness of the seam allowance below is not going to get impressed in your fabric, the dowel is the way to go, because you're really just pressing on a really small surface area. Like I can tell right now that this iron is touching about a 1/4 inch wide section of that dowel. And so I know that I'm not going to end up having this thick seam show through on the other side. And like I said, you can jam this into all sorts of tight little narrow corners. It's such a good trick, and it was $1. Now, if you're a woodworker or you know somebody who's a woodworker, another thing that you can do that's similar to this, but a little bit more stable, right? Because we're talking about a dowel, it's rolling. You can go to Home Depot or any hardware store and you can buy a wider dowel. So maybe this one looks about 3/4 of an inch. Maybe you want one that's like 1 inch to 2 inches. And you can pass it through a table saw so that you have a flat, basically you're gonna cut the tube in half so that you have a flat side, and then you have that flat side is what is stabilized on your pressing surface, and you still get the benefit of that curved surface, but it's not rolling around. And I would actually say that would make a really cheap and great gift for sewists in your life. You could just bang out cut up dowels and they'd be so confused until you explained it to them, and then they would be so happy that you gave it to them. Or you can go to the dollar store and take a plunger off it and use a dowel. It's up to you. Next up on my list is this little weird doohickey guy. What is it called? A hot ruler? I think it's called a hot ruler. So we're going with it. It's made by Clover. I think there's other brands that make them. But essentially, this is a heat-proof, flexible ruler made out of felt. And you're like, why do I need this? Well, a few reasons. I hate pressing hems. I hate pressing hems, and I hate pressing them when I have to do it with a little seam gauge, and I'm pressing my hem, and then I'm going along with my little seam gauge, and I'm making sure it's even. The nice thing about this guy is that you can get really even hems, and you align the edge of the hem using the markers on the ruler, so you can come up and just get super even hems because it's heat proof. So it's fabulous for that. But I've mentioned several times this thing that happens when you are pressing and the imprint of the seam allowance below gets pressed into the outer layer of the fabric, and it's very visible, and especially in wool, especially if you're using something like Melton or mohair or anything that has surface texture, it's really, really obvious, and it kind of ruins the effect of your coat. So what this little hot ruler does is allows you to fix that. So whether or not that's with a wool, canvas, sometimes it'll happen with like a more delicate fabric like viscose if it melts a little bit, or it just gets that imprint. So all you would do is take that hot hem ruler, put it against the offending seam, and repress the outer layer of fabric with this layer, this piece of felt in between, and it should help you hide that imprint. So you're basically just pressing the imprint out, and this ruler is blocking the seam allowance below from showing up on your fabric. You can also just do this with a piece of card, like whenever I'm trying to fix seams that I've overpressed. If you just have a piece of thick cardstock, you can do the same thing. Or you can get this little guy with the ruler lines and use it to help press really beautiful even hems. Okay, we're getting down to the end of pressing tools that you probably don't think you need. And maybe you don't need this one. It's called a sleeve board. And just like my Dollarama dowel or that little seam roll, this thing is for getting into shirts and for getting into pant legs, and especially like once the garment is sewn, so you're wearing your pants, you're wearing your shirt, this thing rules. It basically just lets you get into those narrow tubes and get a really nice press on them. I would say of all of the tools on our list, this is probably the biggest nice to have. But if you've been sewing for a few years and you're looking to add some new tools, we do love this. We use it all the time when we're doing pants. Now for the big boy, the big surprise, the big reveal. Can anybody guess what I'm about to pull out from under the table right now, and why I think it's actually the most important thing that you can have next to your iron? Jimmy, any guesses? Jimmy's going like this. Jimmy's not sure. Here we go. Are you ready? Can I do it really slow and really build the tension? Building it. Guys, it's a Brita water filter. Or a non-brand. It doesn't need to be Brita. It could be any kind of water filter. Is something wrong with Heather? Why is she bringing out a water filter? We're talking about irons. So, if you've been sewing for any length of time, at some point you've probably experienced a spitting iron, and you'll be sewing a beautiful white silk blouse, and all of a sudden rusty water will come shooting out of your iron and ruining your project and making you cry, and you shake your fist at the iron gods and demand to know, what did I do to deserve this? And the reason is that you were using tap water in your iron. And tap water, especially if you live in a place with hard water like the Midwest or London, England, Lord Almighty, is there a lot of minerals in water in London? You are putting all those minerals inside your iron, and they are building up, and they are building up over time, and then they are gumming up the works. They're gumming up the holes of your iron, and this is what causes spitting. So I went and did a ton of research recently to figure out what's the best kind of water should you put in your iron. Is it distilled? Is it deionized? And sometimes iron manufacturers will recommend distilled, and I'm not going to argue with them. If they are telling you the best water that you can use in your iron is distilled water, maybe you should use that. However, I don't want to go to the grocery store and buy bottles of water all of the time, distilled or not. And essentially distilled water is just water that's boiled and they collect the steam. And so any kind of heavy minerals or anything that are in it are left below. Sometimes you'll see irons recommended for deionized water. But what I've read is that distilled water and deionized water can be dangerous inside the iron because they can actually, I think the deionized water is bad in electronic equipment because it has some kind of impact on electronics. And I've read that distilled water can also cause long-term problems. Basically, the most important thing, regardless of what you're doing, is you want to remove the minerals from the water. And you want to do it cheaply and you want to do it quickly. So even if you're not drinking from your Brita filter, I highly recommend having a water pitcher that you use to filter your water. I read a really great article, like this is kind of far and away the best water that you can put in your iron. Again, if it's saying to use distilled or deionized, who am I to argue with an iron manufacturer? But this is what we use. And since we switched to using filtered water, well, more in particular, we have a filter on our tap. So we're using that. Prior to that, we were using this Brita. I don't have problems with spitting irons anymore. I haven't had problems with spitting irons for years. And it's been made the biggest change to the way that we iron and the problems that we have with our irons. And I would say, especially if you're saving up to get an expensive iron, you know, like something like the Reliables that we use in our studio, they're quite expensive. You want to get that, you want that iron to work for a few years at least, and this is the key. So you don't need to buy anything else I've shown you today, but you should have this next to your iron, and you should be using filtered water in your iron to make them happy and spit-free and give you years of service. So here's your PSA for water filters. Can we play like music from like an after-school special right now? Da da da. When you know you grow. What's like the NBC one? Like, now you know, and then there's like a little twinkle. Jimmy doesn't know what I'm talking about, but that's what I'd like to overlay on top of this. So that wraps up my top 8 essential tools that we use here at the Closet Core Studio. I'd love to hear in the comments, are any of these garbage and you don't agree? Is there a tool that you like to use? Pipe up, we want to know. In the meantime, get a filter for your iron, and we'll see you later. Thanks so much for watching.